My phone rang at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. I answered without looking at the screen. My sister didn't bother saying hello. Dad died last night. Everything inside me froze. Before I could ask what had happened, she continued in the same flat voice. He left everything to me and Daniel. You get nothing. In the background, my brother-in-law laughed. Finally, he said, "You're out." I didn't answer, not because I was shocked. Because I was staring at my father. He was sitting across from me at the kitchen table, wearing his old blue cardigan, reading the newspaper while sipping his coffee. 2 weeks earlier, he had suffered a minor heart episode. The doctors insisted he avoid stress for a while, so he'd been staying at my house while recovering. We hadn't told many people because he wanted peace more than sympathy. He looked up from the paper. I quietly pressed the speaker button and placed the phone on the table. My father raised an eyebrow. My sister kept talking. "We'll let you know when the funeral is. Don't make this difficult." Daniel laughed again. "I always told you he'd finally see who deserved his estate." Dad slowly put down his coffee. He leaned toward the phone. "I wasn't aware I died. Silence, not the dramatic kind. The uncomfortable kind that arrives when reality refuses to cooperate with someone's certainty." My sister finally whispered, "Dad, I'm here." Another long pause. Daniel didn't say a word. Dad's voice remained calm. "Would one of you like to explain why you're discussing my estate before checking whether I'm alive?" Nobody answered. The call ended without another sentence. Dad sat back in his chair. He didn't look angry. He looked older. That hurt more than if he had shouted. After several minutes, he folded the newspaper. "I thought I raised both of you better than this. I wanted to defend my sister somehow. To imagine there had been a misunderstanding. But I couldn't." The call hadn't sounded like grief. It had sounded like relief. Later that morning, Dad phoned his solicitors. He asked if we could come in that afternoon. The solicitor already knew about Dad's recent health scare and welcomed us into his office. Nothing theatrical happened, no declarations, no threats. Dad simply requested a complete review of every document. The solicitor explained each page carefully, asking questions Dad had never considered before. Who should make medical decisions? Who should manage financial matters if he became incapable? Did his current will still reflect his intentions? Dad answered slowly. He wasn't changing everything because of money. He was changing it because trust had become impossible to ignore. The solicitor suggested appointing an independent executor instead of placing that responsibility on a family member. Dad agreed. He also decided that every beneficiary should receive clear written explanations to reduce future conflict. It was one of the most practical meetings I'd ever attended, and somehow one of the saddest. When we left, Dad sighed. "I spent years worrying about dividing my property fairly." He looked out the car window. "I should have spent more time making sure you both knew fairness wasn't measured by property." 3 days later, my sister came to my house. She stood on the porch holding flowers. Dad invited her inside. She cried almost immediately. She insisted someone at the hospital had mentioned a patient with the same surname. She said she panicked. She admitted Daniel had convinced her that the worst had happened. Maybe part of that was true, maybe not. The problem wasn't that she believed Dad had died. The problem was how quickly the conversation became about what she thought she would receive. Dad listened without interrupting. When she finished, he thanked her for coming. Then he quietly explained that the estate plan had been updated, not to punish anyone, to protect everyone. An independent executor would oversee everything. No one would have private control. Every decision would follow documented instructions. She nodded. There wasn't much else she could do. As she left, Dad hugged her. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. It wasn't forgiveness either. It was simply a father refusing to let one terrible morning become the final chapter of his family. Months later, Dad's health improved enough for him to return to his own home. Every Sunday, we still shared breakfast. Sometimes my sister joined us. Sometimes she didn't. The conversations were more careful than before. Trust, once cracked, never seemed to fit together quite the same way. One morning, while pouring another cup of coffee, Dad smiled faintly. "You know what bothered me most?" I shook my head. It wasn't hearing people argue over my belongings. He looked at the steam rising from his mug. It was realizing they almost forgot there was still a person attached to them. Neither of us spoke after that. The silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that remains after truth has done its work. Nothing dramatic had been won. No one had been publicly humiliated. The legal documents were organized. The family photographs still hung on the walls. Birthdays still arrived. But every ordinary gathering carried a quiet reminder that greed rarely begins with money. It begins the moment people stop seeing each other as family and start seeing each other as an inheritance.